Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. A little background here. Around 1988, my small software group in the Kodak Research Laboratories adopted peer reviews as an integral part of our software development process, and hence as a foundation for our software engineering culture. We immediately perceived the many benefits that reviews can provide, and now I would never consider working in a software organization in which technical peer reviews were not a fundamental part of the culture and practice. So today I want to present a concise overview of this important technique for you, and I hope you will also be motivated to learn more about and adopt reviews in your organization. So here's what we plan to cover today. Here we go. First of all, I'll tell you what I mean by peer review now that we've said that several times. I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the kinds of benefits that various organizations and individuals in a team can obtain from peer reviews and inspections. An inspection is a particular approach to peer review that's particularly well structured and formal and rigorous. And also expensive. That's the downside. Everything has a price. But I'll talk about reviews and inspections. A lot of similarities, but reviews are really the broader term. Inspections are one particular type of review. And so that leads us nicely to the idea of describing these various approaches that you can take to peer reviews. And there's no perfect way. There's no one way you have to always do it. You don't need to inspect everything. In an ideal world, yes. In a real world where we have limitations on time and resources, you're not going to inspect all of your deliverables. So other kinds of peer reviews can certainly be appropriate and effective in many instances, and I will tell you about those variations. I'll go through a little bit on the inspection process and participants so you can see really sort of the ultimate approach to review and what it involves and who does what. And finally, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to make peer reviews work for you. Now, reviews are not just a technical practice. They are also a cultural and social interaction. And I think that's a very important aspect of understanding how to make reviews be effective in an organization. So along with this idea of making peer reviews work for you, we have another webinar called The Soft Side of Peer Reviews that goes into quite a bit of detail on some of those aspects of the culture and how people interact and really how to make it succeed in an environment. So there's a lot more additional information there if you want to learn more about that important aspect of it. Now, the term review, when it comes to projects, is heavily overloaded. There are a lot of different kinds of reviews you might perform on software projects. Some reviews are for educational purposes, to bring other stakeholders up to speed on where we are on a project and issues that remain to be dealt with and so forth. Other sorts of reviews are for the benefit of management. Sometimes those are called readiness reviews or gate reviews, and those are ways that we can make the key decision makers aware of issues on the project so they can decide whether to proceed with the next part of the project or whether we need to make changes in our staffing, our approach, our strategic objectives, or whatever we need to do. A lot of organizations follow some kind of a phase gate approach to their software development lifecycle, or you're doing an iterative process where at the end of each iteration you decide what to do next. And so some kind of review at that point is often a valuable thing to do. But we're not talking about those kind of reviews. When we talk about peer reviews, we're focusing on just one particular way that people look at what's going on in a project. In fact, even the term peer review means lots of things. In the scientific literature, for example, peer review is a process in which you have a scientist who writes a paper. And I was a scientist once with my PhD in organic chemistry. I've written a number of research chemistry papers. And before any journal will print it, you send it out to a bunch of other reviewers who are going to give you some feedback and help you decide if it's worthy of printing, generally after making some changes. That's one kind of peer review. In some organizations, the term peer review means that at your annual performance appraisal, each individual gets input from some of their colleagues, their peers, on how they're doing. And we're not talking about any of that. We are talking about a kind of technical peer review that examines some of the deliverables, the work products created on a software or really any other kind of project, with the specific intention of looking for possible defects, places where maybe there's something that isn't quite what it ought to be that we ought to consider changing before we move ahead. That's what we're going to be focusing on. There are yet other kinds of reviews. Sometimes people perform a review at the end of a project or a phase or an iteration, which might be called a post-project review, although the official term that's used most widely these days is the term retrospective, where you take some time to reflect on that completed chunk of work to learn lessons for the future, so that the future work you do starting tomorrow can go more smoothly and more effectively than what you did already. And finally, we have an assortment of status reviews on many projects. Those can range from a daily stand-up in a Scrum team to periodic reviews on larger projects where we update various project stakeholders on progress and risks to be considered and where we are compared to where we thought we would be and so forth. So the kind of reviews that we're talking about today are these categories of peer reviews where we're trying to find some possible problems. So let me give you a kind of a formal definition of what I mean by a software peer review. And again, you can take the word software out of this and you can apply this technique to basically any kind of practice that produces deliverables. But we'll talk about software specifically in this presentation. So we can define a software peer review as an examination of a software work product, which could be anything, by people other than the author or the person who created that work product, with the specific intent of trying to identify a defect. And a defect is anywhere the work product departs from its specifications that says this is what it's supposed to be or do, or from any standards that apply to it. And along the way, for free, you get many improvement opportunities, a lot of ideas for how to do things better the next time. And I'll say more about this shortly. So in this particular presentation, I'm using the term defect. Now you might call those faults or bugs or errors or mistakes. That's fine. I'm not going to worry about the semantic differences between those, and there are some differences. But here we're just talking about any place that the product isn't quite up to snuff. It's not quite doing what it's supposed to do or meeting your expectations. Now, technical work needs reviewing for the very same reason that we have pencils with erasers, and that's that people make mistakes. I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. No matter how hard you try, people are going to make mistakes. And sometimes people are good at catching some of the errors that they make, but a lot of errors that escape their own eye can be spotted by someone else. And if you've ever done any software development, you've almost certainly had an experience with this. You know, maybe you're writing a program and you've got some silly little bug that you just can't see. And you know it's small, and yet it's driving you nuts, and it just doesn't jump out at you. So you call to one of your colleagues and say, hey, Susie, can you come over and take a look at this for me for a minute, please? So Susie wanders over and she looks over your shoulder. And so you're explaining to Susie while you're looking at the code what you're trying to do and what your problem is. And one of two things usually happens. Either in the process of you explaining what you're doing, you see it, say, oh, wait, I see it. Okay, great. Thanks, Susie. Susie didn't say anything. She was just standing there, but the fact that you had an opportunity to describe in alternative words than just code what you were doing and what you were struggling with often helps you spot errors of your own work. Or maybe alternatively, as you explain to Susie what's going on, she looks at it for a minute and says, I think maybe this parenthesis is in the wrong place, and she points to part of your code. And you say, oh, yeah, that's it, just didn't see it. Thank you very much, Susie. Now, that was a peer review. It was an extremely simple ad hoc review. You didn't schedule that. You didn't say, hey, I'm going to be stuck at 3:30 this afternoon. Susie, you're going to have a couple of minutes. You can help me? You didn't do that. You just said, I need to get a little help from my friends. And we should never stop doing that. We should always be willing to ask for some assistance from another pair of eyes. We should always be willing to offer the same service to our colleagues. So that's a kind of very rudimentary peer review, but there's other ways to do it that we'll talk about. So the specific purpose of these reviews is to find errors, not to do the other kinds of things I showed from other reviews, to report status or make project decisions, to educate people, although that's a nice side benefit. And particularly, these are not intended